Good morning and welcome to CVUUS. My name is Ellen Flight and I'm a member of the worship team. I welcome those of you here in the sanctuary this morning, those of you joining us by Zoom, and those who will be watching the service later if they find it on our website. We do the gathering song to get everyone in to get into the worship mode, and I'm happy to say this morning, all 6 verses at the very end, the doors closed and everybody was in, so it works. We have hearing assistance for those who need it. That in the corner, you can get a little set of headphones. After the service, we'll be gathering downstairs for fellowship in the Ann Ross Fellowship Hall for snacks and beverages, and we hope you'll join us there, or if you stay on Zoom, there'll be a virtual coffee hour. For visitors or guests this morning, we have these blue sheets on the table in the foyer for you to fill out so that we can send you our emails with information about what's happening and anything that's upcoming. So we'd love to have you do that this morning. And then we're going to color code you if we can do anything else. There's a pink card if you have a joy or concern that you'd like to keep private and have the caring committee know about. And then there's a yellow card for milestones and passages, joys and concerns that you'd like to have shared during the service. So those are available in the back if you haven't found those yet. This morning's service is led by Reverend Tricia Hart, one of our 2 interim ministers. And this morning we'll be remembering and talking about our grandmothers. First, we'd like to recognize that CVUUS gathers on the land of the Western Abenaki people. We respect their spiritual relationship to the land, and we hope to learn from them how we can live together in balance with the earth. Now, the Abenaki stories tell of a character named Grandmother Woodchuck, a wise woman and the grandmother to Gluskabe, a cultural hero. She is a character in several Abenaki tales, including Gluskabe and the game animals. He asks his grandmother for a magic bag to hold game. He tricks the animals into getting into the bag by telling them that the world is ending. When he returns to his grandmother with the bag full of animals, she is disappointed and teaches him that it is important to balance the relationship between humans and animals. The Abenaki people have passed down their history, beliefs, and knowledge through storytelling, and their stories reflect the importance of interdependence and interaction with others, and the idea that Mother Earth nourishes humans. It is now time for us to light our chalice, and we ask Becky Strum. I believe she's the newest grandmother in the congregation, and I'm sure she will show you photos and tell you all about that at the coffee hour. But if you will join me in reading the chalice lighting on the screen or in your order of service while Becky lights the chalice. As we kindle this flame, we honor and remember those who have passed into the mystery. Their brightness lives on in our vision. Their courage lives on in our commitments. And their love continues to bless the world through us.
Before I read you our opening words this morning, I want to tell you something about Kumbaya, which you may not know. There are many, many stories about the origin of this song that lots and lots of us learned at camp or maybe at church a long time ago. And in fact, the reputation of this song did not rise. It fell in recent decades as people have talked about the emptiness of kumbaya moments, which is not at all worthy of the actual history of this song. The best evidence, and it's not entirely understood even now, suggests that kumbaya is in fact an African-American spiritual, that it originated somewhere in the American South. We're not entirely sure where. We know, though, that it has traveled the world to Africa, where missionaries sang it for new converts, to the Northwestern United States, where a white person named Marvin Fry heard it and adapted it as Come By Here, to coastal Georgia and South Carolina, where it was adapted into the Gullah dialect. Versions in Gullah Geechee made it to the northeastern United States. I think that's where we are, where it entered the repertoire of such singers as Pete Seeger and Joan Baez. And eventually it went to Europe and South America, Australia, and other parts of the world. A traveling song, and one that we can cherish, I think. The opening words are from some of the work of the remarkable Issei Barnwell, an African-American composer and singer who is perhaps best known by her involvement in Sweet Honey in the Rock, but she writes a great deal. These words are from her song, Wanting Memories, which gives voice to our longing to remember those that we have loved who are gone, and to find the strength to carry their deepest lessons into our lives now. I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. Now the world outside is such a cold and bitter place. Here inside, I have few things that will console. And when I try to hear your voice above the storms of life, then I remember all the things that I was told. I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. I thought that you were gone, but now I know you're with me. You are the voice that whispers all I need to hear. So, as Ellen mentioned, we are going to do some talking today about grandmothers. And in this time for all of you, I want to tell you something about my grandmother, my mother's mother. Her name was Edna Feely Smith. But I didn't know that probably for years and years when I was a child, because as far as I was concerned, her name was Gaga. So I'm interested to know, what did you call your grandmothers? Grandma? Okay. Becky?
My grandmother was called Big Mama, and my grandfather, Big Daddy. Tennessee Williams did not make that up.
So Big Mama. Grandfather was Big Daddy. All right. Any other variations? Mima. Also a Southern thing. Yes, absolutely. Hannah. Oma. So Oma is my grandmother name, but not because I'm German at all, but just because I needed to pick a name nobody else had. Or yeah, and I didn't want to be Gaga, which I'm a little sorry about now, but yes, Kate. Mooney? Okay, so this was your job. I need to. It's a big responsibility being the first grandchild for grandparents who are like free and want the children to have choice. Yes, the thing is, it may take them a while to figure out what they want the name to be. Yes, Heidi. Nana? Well, gosh, yes, my mother was Nana. Absolutely. Anybody else? Gammy. My grandchildren call one of their grandmothers Danny because it was easier to say, I think, than Granny. I'm not really sure. Any other variations? Yes, Priscilla. Mum Mum. Mum Mum and Pop Pop. Wow. See, people get created. My husband's grandfather name is Oompa. He could have just been Opa, but we thought Oompa added a little style to it. Yes. Anne, did you have one? Super. Your sister's granddaughter calls her grandmother super. Ah, I think that's wonderful. Mary. Wait. Say that again. Bestamore. Wow. That's impressive. Okay. All right. So we've called up all these grandmothers. What was your grandmother's name? Grandma. Okay. Good. All right. Well, that's good. So we called them up to be with us this morning in our memory. My grandmother, this is going to change perhaps the way you think about me, but my grandmother was born 140 years ago. I said this to Peter. He said, no. I said, no. My grandmother was born in 1884. And she had a whole career of working until she was almost 40. And then she got married and had my mother and my uncle. And I'm very glad that she did. But she was almost 70 by the time I was born. And I am just around 70 now. So if you add those two together, it gets to 140. It's pretty stunning to think about how different her life was. Yep. Here's the thing. Anybody else doing the arithmetic quickly enough to know how old my grandmother was when she was first able to vote? She was 36. She was 36 by the time the 19th Amendment got ratified. And women were finally able to vote. That's what we say. And in fact, the truth, of course, is that most white women were able to vote at that point. In effect, it was much longer before many Black women, especially in the South, were able to vote, and Indigenous women even longer. So I only knew my grandmother in this second chapter of her adulthood, and I knew her as Gaga, and she made the most delicious things to eat. She made bread, she made cookies, she made what our favorite thing, which we called Gaga rolls, which are, well, you call them that too, don't you? You know, balls of dough that you can invite a grandchild to help pull and make round, and then you dip them in butter and then in brown sugar. And then you smoosh them together in a pan and they bake and they rise, and they're just the best thing in the universe. So I will tell you a secret. My grandmother did have recipes that I was determined to investigate and perhaps, translate into documents that my siblings and I could use. But really they were just 3x5 cards with little notes on them and largely indecipherable. Or at least when I tried to use them, it appeared that they were definitely incomplete. So I was determined to figure out the Gaga rolls thing. And I tried every combination of what it might be, and none of them turned out right. And then I had a memory of a time that I was cooking with my grandmother with Gaga. And I remembered that there was on the counter a box of Pillsbury hot roll mix. So I decided, and for years, spent time experimenting. Well, she must have taken the Pillsbury hot roll mix with its bleached flour and God knows what else, and mix it with good things. So I tried it in all combinations until the time that I just used the Pillsbury hot roll mix. And there we were, Gaga rolls. My grandmother was definitely smart. and taught us many things. She was very definitely a grown-up. I don't remember her ever getting down on the floor to play with me and my siblings. I do, however, remember that she took me and my sisters out to buy new dresses at Easter. That was probably, I mean, I don't remember any other new dresses in my life. I'm sure he had them, but the one that Gaga picked was my favorite. And there was a time that I talked my grandmother into buying a dress that really was not, it was too big for me, or the colors were wrong or something. And my mother said afterwards that we should take it back and exchange it for something else. And I'm pretty sure I haven't forgiven my mother for that yet. So here's the last question I have for you. What would you say integrity is? Anybody have a thought about the meaning of this idea of integrity? Wholeness. Wholeness, being true to yourself. Yes. What else? Yes.
Standing by the right thing.
Standing by the right thing when no one else is watching. Right. Anything else?
Be honest with yourself and others.
Wow, that is a hard thing, isn't it? Being honest with yourself and with others. Right. My grandmother had integrity, and I knew that somehow even before I knew or perhaps had ever heard the word. And I was talking to my sister yesterday on our weekly Zoom call, and I said, do you remember any stories about Gaga that I should tell the congregation? So hi, Judy, if she's watching. And she said, well, there was that story about voting. And I said, what was that? And Judy said that our mother heard from her mother when the 19th Amendment was ratified and voting was now possible for women. My grandmother's younger sisters, she had 3 younger sisters, and they apparently said, well, I don't know if I'll vote. I mean, just because it's the law, I'm not sure that I'll actually do that. And my grandmother, apparently, their older sister, took them to task and said, what are you talking about? People have worked hard for decades to make it possible for you to vote. So you will certainly vote, she said to her sisters. So that's integrity. I hope that you are thinking of stories of your own grandparents and that maybe you will find a way to tell somebody some of those stories later today. There are many ways. There are many things going on in this congregation and many ways that you can connect with other people in ways that you're interested in. And I want to be sure that you've noticed that on the other side of your order of service, sorry, Ellen, I'm messing up your papers, there are things that will give you a little bit of information about a number of upcoming possibilities. So I hope that you will check that out. I hope you will take it home, maybe put it on your refrigerator if you're in the habit of doing those kinds of things, and check the blast on Wednesdays and the website for more information. Specifically today, the Radical Love Exchange is not beginning, it's continuing, but today at Social Hour is the day that you can get your tickets, right? I'm looking at people who know these answers, and choose your favorite Radical Love Exchange offering. They're downstairs in Fellowship Hall, and I hope you do that. There is a special opportunity that some of you might have seen as you came in. Becky Strum, the newest grandmother, briefly, until you're replaced by someone else, the newest grandmother, is offering 4 tickets each for November 9th and 10th in the afternoons for staged readings of A Case for the Existence of God, a piece I do not know. And Becky, but I think I probably should. And Becky is offering these tickets for those performances. You can get a special ticket out there in the lobby if you want and put it in the appropriate box. If you can stay, Becky especially wants you to take a ticket and maybe have it be drawn, because there'll be an opportunity to talk about this piece with the cast and with the director. Let me see, who's the director? Oh, I think it's Becky. So be sure to take advantage of that if you can. Also at 2:00 this afternoon, there will be a service of remembrance for the community led by Lisa Bessette, hosted by the UVM Palliative Care program. It's open to the public. There'll be candle lighting and music by the Wellspring Singers and readings to remember the lives of loved ones in our hearts. Here, right here. And also, and you will see a slide about this, and there's be more in the e-news this week, but there will be 3 opportunities during election week to gather with others in this congregation. We're calling these election resilience gatherings. One is next Sunday after the service with Reverend Christina. One on Wednesday, November 6th, the day after Election Day at 4:00 with me in person. And then the third one on Thursday, November 7th at 7:30 on Zoom with Reverend Christina. There'll be more details, as I said, if you find yourself feeling the need of company and people to talk to who may or may not believe exactly what you do. And that would be a wonderful thing to have a time to spend together. We will also be peaceful and have some silence in those sessions. So I hope you'll come. Oh yeah, and somebody said, when you're checking out the pathways to connection, don't forget to notice the contra dance on November 22nd, because you need to put it on your calendar now. We take time in the service every week to remember that the support of this congregation is utterly upon our shoulders, those of us who are part of the congregation now. We also do that to collect money to in part give away to organizations in the community whose work aligns with and supports our values, our Unitarian Universalist values, with love at the center. Today is the last Sunday in which we are sharing the offering with the Vermont Abenaki Artists Association, who use artistic opportunities and gifts to share with all of us in very important work. So this offering, which will now be gratefully received, will actually make a difference, a real difference in real people's lives. And we're grateful for your generosity.
We have 3 yellow cards of milestones and passages this morning. From Michelle, Wayne, and Victor Soffenheimer. Oh, yep. We are very grateful for the warm welcome this past month. We are excited to share we now have a home and have started to move in. We are also happy to have Michelle's mom and a family friend visiting this week. So welcome. I see you out there. This is from Marjorie Carson, who has been a long member but has not been living in the area. And it says, this is from via Ginny Ashenfelter. Marjorie asked me to share the delight, surprise, and deep appreciation she has had in receiving your outpouring of love with multiple cards and notes of encouragement. She says with tears, thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is from Dorothy Mammen. Longtime member Elizabeth Golden, who now lives in North Carolina, lost her sister, the Reverend Colleen Squires, this week, suddenly and unexpectedly to a heart attack. She was 61. Reverend Colleen had secured the All Souls had served the All Souls Community Church of Western Michigan for 10 years and was greatly beloved there. May our hearts go out to Elizabeth, Reverend Colleen's wife, Linda, her congregation, and all who knew and loved her.
I'd invite all of us into a few moments of quiet together. Meditation, reflection, prayer, just noticing where you are, looking out the window at this beautiful day. All are good ways to be still. A poem by John Saxon. Listen. Can you hear it? The Spirit is calling. It calls us in the silence and through the noise. It doesn't matter what you call it, for it has no name and many different names. It calls us to greater wholeness, greater connection, greater service, greater love. It's calling us to heal the brokenness. It's calling us to beauty. Let us rest for a moment in the quiet we make together.
In planning this service today, I was asked to do a reflection, or maybe I volunteered to do a reflection on my grandmother, Elizabeth Herdman McGovern. She had a very pink bathroom, and perched on the back of the toilet was a pink hand crocheted doll that was designed to cover up a roll of toilet paper. My grandmother had made it herself, probably in the 1950s when that was a popular bit of home decor. My grandmother lived in that house, the first and only one she lived in for almost the last 60 years of her life, after she and my grandfather had saved to buy it. They saved for over 20 years, so they did not need a mortgage. After living the early years of their marriage during the Great Depression, they didn't really trust banks, and they did not want to owe anyone money. They were able to save in part because they lived and raised their family in the boarding house run by my great-grandmother. And my grandmother always worked outside the home. I talked to my grandmother about this grandmother before from this pulpit. She lived in Western Connecticut and mostly worked in the mills of her hometown. Elizabeth was nothing if not a hard worker with great stamina. She lived to be 99 and a half, in fact, and she worked outside the home of necessity. Her work week was 6 days long, and she told me the average pay was $8 a week. My mother and then I certainly learned the value of working hard from my grandmother, and that one worked hard for the betterment of one's family and others. I think I got my interest and patience for crafting, if not her taste, from her. Yes, the craftiness led to that pink crochet doll that hung out in her bathroom, but she also made all the grandkids and others mittens and other clothing items. My favorite was a red, white, and blue poncho I got one Christmas in the 1970s. Too young to be a hippie, I could at least feel a little bit like one in that poncho. I realized many years later that what a pleasure it is to give someone a gift of one's own making. And I'm sure she felt that many times over the years. My grandmother didn't really travel much outside of her hometown, but she brought the world into her home. She read voraciously and collected postcards. Her neighbor across the street brought her a dozen books from the library every 2 weeks. She kept her stack of books by her chair, and I keep my stack of books by my bed. My grandmother kept scrapbooks and boxes of postcards sent to her by family and friends. Until her death, it was always a focus of mine whenever I traveled to send her the most interesting postcards I could find. And I've missed that part of in my travels. Instagram just doesn't quite do it. But I have kept her interest in learning about the larger world with me. In remembering my grandmother for today's service, I more clearly see the seeds she planted with her brightness, courage, and love that have continued to bless my world and others through me.
Thank you, Ellen. I can just see that little pink doll. So decades ago, when I was married for the first time, my husband, whose name was Andrew, had an aunt named Gretchen. Gretchen was nobody's grandmother. She had never married. She had no children. She was nevertheless very much the matriarch of the extended family. And attendance at Thanksgiving and Easter dinner at Gretchen's house was not optional for anyone in the country. Gretchen was daunting. She was an associate dean at Pembroke College for a long time. And many years later, when I was a student at Brown, I would occasionally mention her name just to alumni of Pembroke, just to see their, all the blood drain from their faces, and they were figuring out what they might have done wrong that Gretchen had to. Anyway, she was daunting. She was funny. She was intimidating. And she was an expert gardener of flowers. Gretchen could make plants grow and blossom like no one else that I had known at that point in my life, or at least no one that I was related to. Outside, she lived in Seekonk, Massachusetts, and all around her house were these garden beds filled with extraordinary flowers. But this continued inside as well, because people gave Gretchen plants. They gave her rare plants with exotic blossoms and abundance, plants that really only should be happy in the jungle, like many of our houseplants. That did not daunt Gretchen, because unlike in other people's houses where they might have sickened and died, these plants in Gretchen's house, they would come back to life after they had bloomed from the florist, and they would bloom again and again. I liked visiting her in no small part because I wanted to visit her plants. Years went by. Gretchen grew older and frail. Looking back, she was dying for a long time, over several years, but we didn't talk about that. The sharpness of her mind never faded. Her ability to make plants thrive, though, did. So some of these plants in her house that had existed and been refulgent for years began to die. The begonias, the hibiscus, the Christmas cactuses of many different colors, even some of the ivies that I had never seen anywhere else, all of it pale and shriveled. Gretchen sometimes gave me a plant at the end of a visit. More often, though, she didn't seem to notice. My very, very favorite plant of Gretchen's was a lipstick plant. Anybody know what a lipstick plant is? I'm sure you do. I had never seen one before, and the Latin name is Escananthus, something like that. It's extraordinary because it blooms sort of in two stages. There's this dark red, almost magenta blossom that comes out. And then when you think that's amazing, out of that comes this bright red blossom that almost looks like a lipstick coming out of a lipstick tube. I had never seen anything like it, and I looked for it every time we visited until the Thanksgiving when the lipstick plant was gone from its place in the dining room window. I didn't say anything, but it made me sad. And then I was doing the dishes and noticed that on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, there was a cutting, just a stick with a couple of leaves, but I knew it was from that plant. It stayed there, I swear, for years. I mean, months anyway. It never rooted and it never died. Gretchen herself did die eventually, and the house was being sold, and my husband joined his cousin in going down to Seacott to clean out her house. And he asked me if I wanted anything. And I said, just one thing, if it's still there, the cutting of the lipstick plant on the windowsill in the kitchen. It was still there. And he brought it home. And so, of course, I took this little cutting, which was at that point in a damp paper towel. I stuck it in a new vase with new water, and I put it, of course, on the windowsill above the sink in my house in Maine. And for months, there it sat, not developing any roots, not doing anything, but also not dying. Until finally, one day, a little root appeared, a little white root in the water. Wasn't sure that I had maybe hallucinated it, but then there was another, and then some new leaves arrived. And so, of course, I potted it and I moved it to a sunny spot in the house. Did I tell you I was living on coastal Maine? So sunny spots were definitely few and far between, but it grew. It grew stems, it grew leaves, and then it bloomed magnificently. It was at least this big. And I did at only one, I think 20 years ago, probably, one sermon in which I told the story, and I actually pulled out the plant to show it to people. It did not survive the many, many moves that Peter and I have made, but you can imagine it. I know you can. That plant meant a lot to me. It meant success and survival, I guess, but it also meant, in a way, to me at least, that Gretchen was still a part of my life and my children's lives too. She was feisty and opinionated. She said what she thought. You couldn't miss her. And you can't really miss a lipstick plant in full bloom either. Having her plant in my house seemed like something that would have pleased her, almost as if her spirit was still with us, keeping watch. So what and who do you remember? An aunt, a grandfather, a teacher, a sister, or a friend from school, or maybe a best loved doggy, somebody who knew you, someone who has stayed and is still there in your memory. My grandmother, Edna Feely Smith, died almost 50 years ago during my first year in college. I'm astoundingly old. But it was a busy and confusing and exciting chapter in my life. And as I think back to that, I think I felt sorry. I felt sad for my mother. It was only later that I began to realize how many gifts my grandmother had given me as well, and how much I wish I had asked about a million questions. Edna was the oldest of 5 children. Their mother, my great-grandmother, who was born in Ireland and who met her father when she was 6 years old, because her father had left the country by himself, the way lots of Irish people did in the 1840s, I think, and to make some money in America, enough money to be able to bring over the rest of the family. Well, my great-grandmother was in utero when he left, and so she met her dad when she was 6. Always thought that story was amazing. So that great-grandmother had been widowed before the age of 40 with 5 kids. They lived in Ithaca, New York. And that family, my family, managed, not in small part due to what Edna did. She graduated from high school, we think, and she went to work right away. She worked at Cornell in student activities. How many of you have been to Ithaca enough to know what I mean, I know there were trolleys, but nevertheless, the idea of walking up that gosh darn hill to Cornell when you live on the flats in the town. She lived at home, I'm sure to save money and to help her mother and her sisters. And then when she was 38, working away, an old maid at Cornell, she fell in love with my grandfather, who was a junior professor in chemistry. He had been in World War I. He died young too, so I never met him. But he had been in World War I. He had gone to Cornell, had a degree in chemistry. So in those years in the late teens and very early 20s, when many of the faculty had gone to war and were coming back, there were jobs for young people. So for a few years, he actually taught at Cornell until he got a job at Kodak after Cornell let him go. I explained some of this timing to my oldest son, who has a graduate degree, and he said, oh, well, he didn't get tenure. And that makes sense. They moved to Rochester, and my grandmother moved into this next chapter of her life, the one where I knew her as Gaga. She was a strong, smart, straight-ahead woman. She was kind, but she was private. I don't remember her ever saying out loud how much she loved us, the flock of children that my parents produced, but it was completely clear that she did. I remember one time in particular, my mother and father were away, which meant that there was definitely a babysitter in the house, but I have absolutely no recollection of whoever that woman was. I came down with a cold or a tummy bug or something, and I was feeling pretty sorry for myself, and I complained. I wanted my mother, and I imagine this beleaguered babysitter called my grandmother. I'm not sure why my grandmother came over, but she did. She came up to my room. She was on her way out someplace. My grandmother, after her husband died, and she never owned a house of her own, but she had this quite vibrant social life with her friends. She played bridge and they traveled some. And I never could tell her various old lady friends apart, except that one was called Mercedes. And my younger sister, the one that I asked about, had an imaginary friend that we were all, remember that? You know, an imaginary friend is sitting on a chair in the living room and none of the rest of us can sit there. That imaginary friend's name was Mercedes. Anyway, my grandmother came in the room. She was dressed in her navy blue suit. She had a pillbox hat. Remember that look? And she put her hand on my forehead. And I can almost still feel it. It was as if a breath of fresh air came into the room, and whatever had been wrong with me was really not so bad, and I was going to be fine. It just made me know, to be near her, that I was safe and that I was loved. I don't remember my grandmother's funeral. I think maybe I wasn't there. But now, having led many memorial services in my life, there is a reading that I would include if it were up to me to decide what should be read at my grandmother's funeral. It's a piece by Hadley Stevenson, which he wrote after the death of his friend Eleanor Roosevelt. And it ends this way. We are always saying farewell in this world, always standing at the edge of a loss, attempting to retrieve some human meaning from the silence, something which was precious and is gone. We are lonelier. Someone has gone from one's own life who was like the certainty of refuge. Someone has gone from the world who was like a certainty of honor. I hope you are thinking of people who were like a certainty of refuge and honor in your life, people you treasured, along with their gifts to you. Perhaps you're also thinking of so many questions that you wish that you had asked, and maybe some of the people that you could ask are still around, and maybe you could ask them. But even without the answers to the questions or the full backstory, we know how we've been marked by those who have been our shaping influences, because we change each other, we humans. Our connections with each other are quite literally our lifelines. Through our care, through the simplest of daily contacts with one another, we find new reasons to get up in the morning, to try our best, to make the world just a little more beautiful. And these marks last even after people leave us. It is extraordinary to notice, as I have done as I've grown older, the impact that others have made on me and those coming after me as well. I catch myself all the time wearing my mother's expressions. Does this happen to you? The shock of looking in the mirror, of hearing my father's words coming out of my mouth, and seeing my son and now his son with my brother's stride. We wear signs of each other. We incorporate each other into our own lives and bodies. And thus we live on and on. That is a good thing. E.C. Barnwell's song that I read to you some lyrics of at the beginning of this. It voices our completely human longing to hang on to the wisdom and love of those who taught us what matters most, and taught us how much we matter. And how it is true, at least sometimes, that those who formed us can still be our teachers when we need them most. I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. Now the world outside is such a cold and bitter place. Here inside, I have few things that will console. And when I try to hear your voice above the storms of life, then I remember all the things that I was told. I think on the things that made me feel so wonderful when I was young, the things that made me laugh, made me dance, made me sing, the things that made me grow into a being full of pride. I think on these things, for they are true. I am sitting here wanting memories to teach me to see the beauty in the world through my own eyes. I thought that you were gone, but now I know you're with me. You are the voice that whispers all I need to hear. Let us speak together the words of extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish There we go. We extinguish this flame, remembering always to keep love at the center. Our closing words today are from Khalil Gibran. He wrote, "When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight."
May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be ever at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and the rain fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, we're not holding ever in the palm of his hand. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be ever at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and the rain fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you, may God hold you.